everyone. Welcome back to my podcast. The World Economic Forum has recently released several reports, including some eye-catching climate change studies that have left me wondering, are we doing enough to prevent the devastating impact of climate change on our businesses and environment? According to these reports, climate change is expected to have a significant impact on businesses, resulting in substantial losses of fixed assets, reduced worker productivity, and disruptions to supply chains. By 2035, companies can expect an average annual loss of approximately 7% of their fixed assets, potentially rising to over 20% in capital-intensive industries. But that's not all. The discussion around climate finance took center stage at the TAUP29 event, with many countries grappling with the need for defense funding. However, I couldn't help but wonder if the impact of conflicts like Russia-Ukraine and Israel-Palestine on the environment were given sufficient attention. These wars are causing immense damage to our planet, and it's hard to see how individual companies' CO2 emissions control efforts can make a difference when faced with such large-scale destruction. In light of these reports, today's podcast will be focusing on climate change, drawing primarily from the latest World Economic Forum research. So let's dive in and explore what this means for our future. Always stay safe.
Hey there. Welcome back for another deep dive.
Always good to be back.
This time, we're focusing on climate finance and resilience.
Yeah.
We've got some pretty hefty reports in front of us, mainly from the World Economic Forum, but also some interesting stuff from the OPEC Fund and UN Water, too.
Sounds like a good mix.
And look, we know you guys are already pretty clued in on climate issues, so
For sure.
we're going to jump right in, talk about what really grabbed our attention, what surprised us, what this all actually means for you, like in the real world.
The stuff that matters.
Exactly.
It's fascinating, how these reports, especially the ones from the WEF, they're really tying climate risks directly to economic impacts, like tangible consequences.
It's not just hypothetical anymore.
No, not at all. We're way past talking about rising temperatures in a vacuum.
Right.
It's about the bottom line now, dollars and cents, and businesses are either adapting to these changes or, and this is the scary part, they're failing to adapt.
Failing to adapt. And that brings us to the WF's Business on the Edge report.
Oh yeah, that one was...
They don't mince words.
Nope.
They're predicting that by 2035, we're talking a little over a decade from now.
Okay.
Listed companies could be looking at fixed asset losses between 6.6% and 7.3% of their earnings every single year.
Every year, that's the kicker.
Yeah, it's not a one-time hit.
Right. Imagine, the entire profit margin of the S&P 500.
Oh, wow.
Just gone, vanished. What happened during the 2008 financial crisis?
But happening every year.
Annually, consistently. That's the kind of risk we're talking about.
That's a pretty stark picture.
It is. And here's the thing.
Yeah.
Those figures, they only account for the tangible assets, the stuff you can see and touch.
Right, the physical stuff.
Exactly. But what about all those intangible assets, the ripple effects?
The stuff that's harder to measure.
Harder to measure, but just as damaging, if not more so.
Yeah, what kind of things are we talking about here?
Well, you've got your disrupted supply chains, which we're already seeing. Right. Health impacts on workforces, which can lead to decreased productivity, increased costs.
And then there's consumer confidence too, right?
Absolutely. That's a huge one. When people are worried about the future, they spend less, they invest less, and that has a ripple effect throughout the entire economy.
It's like a domino effect.
Exactly. It's a cascade.
And what really stood out to me was how the WEF breaks it down by sector.
Oh, yeah, that was interesting.
Like how utilities and telecommunications are potentially facing the biggest hit.
Oh, for sure.
They're saying earnings losses could top 20% within the next decade.
It all comes down to infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
These sectors rely on massive infrastructure networks.
And those networks are vulnerable.
Incredibly vulnerable to climate change.
So it's not just an environmental issue anymore.
No, it's an economic imperative.
We have to rethink how we invest in these essential sectors.
Absolutely. Resilience has to be built into our power grids, our data centers, everything.
Okay. Then there's this whole concept of Earth system tipping points.
Ah, yes. The tipping points.
Which honestly sounds like something out of a disaster movie.
A little bit, yeah, but unfortunately it's based in science.
So are we really on the verge of irreversible climate shifts?
The WEF report seems to think so.
Really?
They highlight 5 tipping points that are, according to their analysis, alarmingly close.
Like what? What kind of tipping points?
Well, there's the complete collapse of the Greenland ice sheet,
Okay.
which would have massive implications for sea level rise.
Right.
And then there's the mass die-off of warm water coral reefs,
How? Way?
which would devastate marine ecosystems and impact coastal communities around the world.
These are global events.
Absolutely, and we're talking about events that could trigger further cascading effects.
So knowing all this, and I know you're already plugged into these issues,
Yeah, I try to stay informed.
what does this all mean for you? Like, practically speaking.
I think it really underscores the urgency of both adaptation and mitigation.
Okay.
The WEF report leans heavily on the potential of nature-based solutions.
Nature-based solutions. Like what?
Things like regenerative agriculture, which can help sequester carbon in the soil, and mangrove restoration, which can protect coastlines from storms and rising sea levels.
These are things that benefit both the climate and the economy.
Exactly. It's a win-win.
And it's not all doom and gloom, right?
Yeah, no, not at all.
I mean, the WEF report highlights companies that are already stepping up, innovating.
Yeah, some really cool examples in there.
Like Unilever, they're installing solar plants in areas prone to typhoons.
Smart move.
And Cemex, they're developing this permeable concrete that absorbs rainwater to help prevent flooding.
That's innovative.
It's like turning a problem into a solution.
Exactly. And these examples show that climate resilience can actually be a competitive advantage.
It's about thinking ahead, right?
Absolutely. It's about proactive planning, making smart investments, and...
I hear about collaboration even among competitors.
Yeah, that's a big one. The WEF suggests that companies can actually benefit from sharing knowledge. And working together to reduce the risks of this transition, it's a pretty radical idea.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the OPEC Fund's climate finance report.
Right.
They've doubled their climate financing in recent years, which is encouraging.
Yeah, definitely a positive step.
But they also acknowledge that globally, climate finance is still lagging behind.
Way behind.
They're saying it's only about 1/5 of what's actually needed to keep warming below 2 degrees Celsius.
That's the target, right?
That's the goal, yeah. So we've got a long way to go.
A long way to go. But the OPEC report also highlights some really interesting country-specific projects.
Okay, like what?
They're talking about sustainable agriculture initiatives in Burundi and water resource management projects in the Maldives, places that are particularly vulnerable.
And then there's that Great Green Wall initiative, right?
Oh, yeah, that's a massive undertaking.
Trying to create this mosaic of restored landscapes across Africa's Sahel region.
An incredible project. And the WEF actually has a separate report on how the voluntary carbon market could be used to help fund this project, potentially unlocking billions of dollars in investment.
Wow, that's impressive.
It's a great example of how market mechanisms can be used not just for climate action, but also for community development, creating jobs, improving livelihoods.
And the WEF report emphasizes the importance of land tenure rights.
Absolutely crucial.
And incorporating indigenous knowledge into these projects.
So important, making sure the benefits are shared equitably.
Okay, and finally, let's sprinkle in some insights from the UN water reports.
Right.
They bring up a point that I think is often overlooked, which is that a lot of our climate mitigation strategies, like the shift to clean energy, they're actually heavily reliant on water.
Oh, for sure. Water is essential for so many processes.
So we need to be factoring water availability and usage into every single climate action plan.
Absolutely. We can't just assume that water will be there when we need it.
Especially with water scarcity already being such a major issue.
Yeah, and climate change is only going to exacerbate that.
So investing in water-efficient technologies is critical.
Absolutely.
And nature-based solutions, too, like restoring wetlands.
Those can be incredibly effective for water management.
This is all interconnected, right?
Totally. Climate, water, energy, it's all part of the same system.
We need to be thinking holistically about these challenges.
I can't afford to silo our thinking anymore.
And our solutions either.
Exactly. It's all connected. It's easy to get lost in these global reports, kind of lose sight of the tangible impacts. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
But the WEF report, they do a good job of zooming in, showing how these abstract risks actually play out in the real world, with the built environment, for example, buildings, infrastructure.
Okay, yeah, that's something we can all relate to.
Exactly. We all live and work in these spaces.
Right.
And the impacts, they're pretty direct.
Yeah, the WEF report has some pretty stark numbers on that.
Oh, yeah, they don't sugarcoat it.
They estimate that by 2035, retail properties in China alone,
Just China.
just China, could face annual climate-related losses of $21 billion.
That's a lot of money.
And by 2055, under a high-emission scenario, that figure jumps to almost $34 billion.
Wow. And that's just one country? One sector?
It's a global issue.
Absolutely. The report highlights how extreme heat, buckle roads, warp railway tracks, even cause bridges to get stuck.
Yeah, I never thought about that.
We take infrastructure for granted, but it's all designed within certain climate parameters.
Makes sense.
When those parameters change, things start to break down.
And it gets expensive.
Very expensive.
So it's not just about new construction then?
No, not at all.
We have this massive existing building stock globally.
A huge amount of existing infrastructure.
So what do we do about that?
Well, retrofitting is key.
Retrofitting.
Yeah, improving energy efficiency, water efficiency in existing buildings. It's not just about making them more sustainable.
Right.
It's about making them safer, more resilient for the people who use them.
So it's a win-win.
Exactly.
The report also talks about nature-based solutions for the built environment.
Oh yeah, those are becoming increasingly popular.
Can you give me some examples of what that looks like?
Sure. Things like green roofs, which can help insulate buildings and reduce the urban heat island effect. Urban forests, which can provide shade and absorb rainwater. Permeable pavements, which allow water to seep into the ground instead of running off.
So it's about integrating nature back into our cities.
Exactly. It's about working with nature, not against it.
Okay, let's move on to another sector that's feeling the pressure.
Right.
Agriculture and food systems.
Yeah, that's a big one.
The WEF paints a pretty grim picture of how climate hazards are disrupting.
They are, yeah.
Every stage of the food supply chain, from growing crops to raising livestock.
It's affecting everything.
Storage, transportation, even access to nutritious food.
It's a global food security issue.
And this feels especially relevant now with rising food prices and all the supply chain issues.
It's all connected.
So climate change is exacerbating these problems.
Absolutely. It's a threat multiplier.
So what can we do about it? How do we adapt our food systems?
Well, the WEF report highlights the importance of climate-smart agriculture.
Okay. What does that involve?
Things like drought-resistant crops, improved water management, diversifying food sources.
So basically making our food systems more resilient.
Exactly. And they also emphasize reducing food loss and waste.
Yeah, that's a huge problem.
It is. We waste a third of the food we produce globally.
That's crazy, and it's something we can all do something about.
Absolutely. Be more mindful of what you buy, how you store your food, how much you throw away.
Little things can make a big difference.
You really can.
Okay, another sector we touched on earlier is energy.
Yeah, energy is at the heart of the climate challenge.
The WEF report goes beyond just infrastructure vulnerability.
Right.
And really delves into the complexities of the energy transition.
It's a complex issue, for sure.
So we know moving away from fossil fuels is essential.
Absolutely. We have to decarbonize our energy systems.
But that creates new challenges and vulnerabilities.
It does. The report highlights how many renewable energy sources.
Okay.
They're reliant on weather patterns, like solar needs sunlight, wind needs wind.
Right.
But climate change is making those patterns more unpredictable, more extreme.
So that can affect reliability.
It can. It can pose challenges for grid stability and energy security.
And then there's the water issue.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier.
Water scarcity is already a problem.
A big problem.
And a lot of clean energy technologies require significant amounts of water.
For cooling, for other processes.
What's the trade-off?
In a way, yeah. But the report emphasizes that we have to consider the water footprint.
Of different energy sources.
Exactly. And adopt water-efficient technologies wherever possible.
So it's about being smart and strategic.
Absolutely. We need a holistic approach to the energy transition.
So what's the solution? How do we make this transition both climate-friendly and resilient?
Well, the WEF report stresses the need for a multifaceted approach, investing in smart grids that can handle the variability of renewables.
Makes sense.
Diversifying our energy mix. Incorporating energy storage solutions.
But we're not just reliant on one source.
Exactly. And prioritizing energy efficiency. That's huge.
Reducing our overall energy demand.
Exactly. And of course, we can't forget about the human element.
Right, the people.
This transition is going to create new jobs, require new skills.
So investing in workforce development is key.
Absolutely. We need to ensure a just and equitable energy transition.
Okay, let's shift our focus to the technology sector.
All right.
It plays a dual role in this whole climate challenge.
It does. It's both part of the problem and part of the solution.
On the one hand, it's a driver of emissions and resource consumption.
Think about all the energy used by data centers, the materials needed for electronics.
But on the other hand, technology can also be a powerful tool for climate action.
Oh, absolutely. It can help us develop and deploy solutions.
This is a double-edged sword.
It is, and the WF report really highlights that duality.
They talk about responsible innovation in the tech sector.
That's a key concept.
What does that mean in practice?
It's about thinking beyond just technological advancement and considering the environmental and social impacts of these technologies.
Throughout their life cycle.
Exactly, from sourcing raw materials to manufacturing, use, disposal, recycling.
So it's a holistic approach.
It is. We need to think about the bigger picture, the long-term consequences.
And speaking of long-term consequences, the final sector covered in the WEF report is human health and well-being.
That's often overlooked, but it's crucial.
Climate change is already impacting human health.
It is. We're seeing the effects right now.
And as temperatures rise and extreme weather events become more frequent, those impacts are only going to get worse.
It's a public health crisis.
It really is. The WEF report lays out some pretty sobering statistics.
They do. It's a wake-up call.
We're talking about heat stress, respiratory illnesses, the spread of infectious diseases, malnutrition.
And these impacts will disproportionately affect the most vulnerable populations.
The people who have contributed the least to climate change.
But are often least equipped to cope with its consequences.
So it's a social justice issue as well.
Absolutely. Climate justice is a key part of the conversation.
The report talks about the need for climate-resilient healthcare systems.
Yeah. That's essential.
So what does that look like?
Well, it means ensuring that healthcare facilities are prepared for extreme weather events.
So they can withstand storms, floods, heat waves.
Exactly. And it means strengthening disease surveillance and response systems.
Being able to track and contain outbreaks.
Right. And it also means ensuring access to clean water and sanitation.
Which are essential for public health.
Absolutely. And it's also about addressing the underlying social and economic factors
that make people vulnerable to climate impacts.
It's a multifaceted challenge for sure.
So after this deep dive into the WEAF report, what are the big takeaways?
Well, I think the overarching message is that climate risks are no longer something we can ignore.
They're here now.
They're here. They're impacting every sector of the economy.
And they're only going to get worse if we don't act.
Exactly. The WEF report makes it very clear that inaction is far more costly than action.
And it's not just about cost, right?
No, it's about ethics. It's about responsibility.
It's about safeguarding our planet for future generations.
Absolutely. Investing in adaptation and mitigation is not just the right thing to do.
It's the smart thing to do.
Exactly. It's about protecting assets, securing supply chains, safeguarding people's health.
And ultimately, creating a more resilient and sustainable future.
That's the goal.
And the WEF report really emphasizes collaboration.
Yeah, this isn't a problem any one entity can solve on their own.
It requires everyone to work together.
Businesses, governments, investors, communities, we all have a role to play.
Okay, let's shift focus for a moment and look at the financial services sector.
All right.
They play a crucial role in driving climate resilience, don't they?
They do. They have a lot of power and influence.
Absolutely. They're the ones who can really make things happen
or not.
Yeah. So how does the WEF report frame this? Like, what's at stake here for the financial sector?
Well, they highlight this this interesting paradox, I guess you could call it.
Okay.
They say that financial institutions, their portfolio emissions,
meaning the emissions from the companies and projects they invest in.
Right. Those are on average over 700 times larger than their direct operational emissions.
Whoa.
That's a huge difference.
So it's not just about how they operate internally, it's about where their money's going.
Exactly. And the report makes a pretty strong case that financial institutions have a responsibility here.
Okay.
To align their portfolios with climate goals.
Meaning?
Shifting investments away from those high carbon activities, fossil fuels, things like that.
And towards those climate solutions we were talking about.
Precisely. Renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, all that good stuff.
But this isn't just about avoiding risk, right? I mean, this also represents a huge opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. There's a whole new market emerging around sustainability and climate resilience.
Like a green gold rush.
Kind of, yeah. The report estimates that transitioning to a net zero economy by 2050, that's going to require an additional $3.5 trillion in annual investment globally.
That's a lot of money.
It's a staggering amount of capital that needs to be mobilized, directed towards these climate solutions.
So it's not just about doing the right thing, it also makes good business sense.
Exactly. And the WEF report points out that the companies that are already leading on sustainability, They're seeing real benefits. They're attracting top talent.
Okay.
They're seeing faster sales growth for green products.
Interesting.
And they're even commanding price premiums for sustainable goods and services.
So it pays to be green, literally.
It does. It really does.
Okay, so what are some concrete actions the WEF recommends for financial institutions?
Well, one key recommendation is integrating climate risk assessments into every investment decision.
So like understanding the potential impacts of climate change on different assets.
Exactly, and incorporating those risks into financial models.
So they're not just looking at traditional financial metrics.
Right, they're factoring in climate risks as well.
And it's not just about physical risks, like extreme weather events, right?
No, there are also those transition risks we talked about earlier.
Like policy changes, market shifts, technological disruptions.
Exactly, all those things that come with the shift to a low-carbon economy.
So financial institutions need to be prepared for that.
Absolutely, they need to assess their exposure to carbon-intensive assets.
And think about how climate policies might impact their portfolios.
Precisely.
It seems like transparency and disclosure are crucial here, too.
Oh, absolutely. Investors need reliable information to make informed decisions.
So they need to know about the climate risks and opportunities associated with different investments.
Right, and that's where transparency comes in.
The WEF report encourages financial institutions to adopt standardized reporting frameworks.
Yeah, so there's consistency and comparability.
And to disclose their climate-related financial risks in a clear and comprehensive manner.
It's all about building trust and accountability.
And of course, we can't forget about innovation.
Oh, innovation is key.
The financial services sector has a huge role to play in developing new financial products.
Yeah, products that can support climate resilience.
So things like green bonds, climate insurance, resilience bonds.
Exactly, and blended finance models that can combine public and private capital.
To make these investments less risky.
Right. It's about being creative and finding new ways to channel capital towards a sustainable future.
So it feels like the financial sector is at a crossroads.
They really are.
They could either cling to those old ways of doing business.
Yeah, the high carbon status quo.
Or they can embrace this transition to a climate resilient economy.
And the smart money's on the latter.
What would you say is the most important takeaway for financial institutions from the WEF report?
I think the key message is that climate change is fundamentally reshaping the financial landscape.
It's not just a side issue anymore.
It's a core business consideration.
And those who recognize this and act decisively,
they're the ones who will thrive in the long term.
It's about foresight, adaptation, recognizing that sustainability and profitability are intertwined.
Exactly. The future belongs to those who understand that.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive.
It's been a fascinating one.
We've covered a lot today, from those very real economic risks of climate change to the incredible potential of these innovative solutions.
Yeah, there's a lot of hope out there.
And that crucial role the financial services sector has to play in driving this transition.
Absolutely. They're key players.
So as our listeners navigate this complex landscape, what are your final thoughts for them?
Well, it's clear that climate change is a complex challenge.
For sure.
But it's also a tremendous opportunity, for innovation, for transformation. These WF reports, along with those insights from the OPEC Fund and UN Water, they paint a clear picture of the risks.
Right.
But they also offer a roadmap for action,
They show us what we need to do.
Exactly. They show us that we have the knowledge, the tools, the resources
to create a more resilient, equitable, and sustainable future.
It's not about despair. It's about action, making informed choices.
Yeah.
Both in our personal lives and in our professional endeavors.
It's about recognizing that we're all part of this interconnected system.
And the choices we make today, they shape the world we leave for future generations.
That's a powerful thought.
It is, and it's a responsibility we all share.
Well said. That's a great note to end on. The future's in our hands.
It is.
And the choices we make today determine the kind of world we leave behind.
That's the truth.
So let's go out there and be a force for positive change.
Let's do it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.